G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talk Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 15th of February 2026. I'm your host, the author David Applegate. And as the war continues in Ukraine, they keep announcing new weapons. You send drones to Ukraine, suddenly they've invented drones. You send air defences to Ukraine, suddenly they're strapping British missiles onto Australian-made off-road vehicles, and they're calling them Ukrainian air defense. Now, of course, back in the early days of the war, Rheinmetall from Germany, without any explanation, set up the 100 kilowatt laser in Kiev, and then inexplicably never used it, allegedly, and people could not even find it. Well, some German opposition parties members actually went looking for it. Well, it suddenly reappeared in Germany, broken. Rheinmetall has refused to explain to the German government what happened to it. But all of a sudden, yesterday evening, Ukraine test-fired a laser. And they go, look what we invented, 100 kilowatt laser, everybody! Indeed, you have forgotten that Zelensky called Ukraine the new Israel. They are, think about it, permanently at war, permanently in our pockets. Technological transfer. Every time they get something, they claim to have invented it. And the world sits back and says, oh, look what you invented. The similarities are astounding. And some people wonder why they're not liked. Well, not everybody is licking Zelensky's shiny brass baubles. Did I say shiny? Well, they're probably gold-plated like his toilet. But GenZ has spoken. They don't want to die for Ukraine. Ukraine means nothing to them. Why should they die for Ukraine when the people who want war in Ukraine won't go fight it, hate our guts, want to replace us with migrants, and then want to fill migrants into Kiev? Why? Because somehow it will make the world a better place. See, brown people are oppressed. They're only angry because they're oppressed. If they weren't oppressed, because they're the natives of the world, we've got to free the natives, native rights, free movement. And all this other pie-eating garbage, right? They're nothing but spoilt, indoctrinated brats. Right? Boomers have blown up, bulldozed, and pretty much looted the planet. And now they want free healthcare and all these free healthcare workers. And they want cheap labour to pay for everything. Because nothing lasts. Everything collapses. But they don't care because they're going to die. But they have stolen not just the pension funds of Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, alphas, zetas, why? Well, it's actually Zoomers, alphas, sorry. But, and the betas. So why should we care, right? This is a boomers war. Let's send all the boomers, right? Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and everybody older than them, all the people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, go to Ukraine. Fly your Ukraine flag. Say sloppy Ukrainia. And all the other slogans. And see how that gets you. Because we don't want you anymore. We're sick of your wars. We're sick of your lies. They lied about World War II. There is actual proof, right? That there was a grand conspiracy to put the Nazis in the power in Germany, right? To set up and the Germans were supposed to only go to war against Russia. Right? Right? But But all the warmongers in England, they wanted their war. Oh, we can't have Germany dominate Europe. They will be a threat to our economy. You know, the boomers have constantly destroyed this planet in the name of their economy. Right? But don't think the boomers are alone in this. Don't forget also the Bolsheviks have destroyed this planet in the name of Bolsheviks. The workers must unite. Okay, so the workers united and elect Trump, and they go, no, that's not what we want. We want revolution. We want progressivism. So you've got the drug-addled boomers and the warmonger boomers. And they swap places because they're both warmongers and they're both drug-addled and they're both entitled and they both want freebies. It's like, put him in the room, close the door, and let him at it. So, believe me, that's fine. You could look up the fate of Paulus, right? Rudolf Hess, right? They lied about Hess. They drugged him, right? He had gone to UK on a secret mission. He was never supposed to be captured. He was supposed to meet with people who opposed the war, believed that the carnage had gone on long enough, right? That millions were now dead, right? And it was time to end it before we get to the catastrophe stage, right? And there was genuine fear on both sides of catastrophe, right? The Soviet victory, right? Or worse, America dominating Europe, right? Neither was acceptable to them. Right? Either Russia or America dominating Europe. Europe did not want that. Right? So you think all these lies, all these years, right? You hear Operation Black Star that backfired and to seize a spy ship in the Gulf of Tonkin. And the Vietnamese responded to a ship distress. There was no, we fired on an American ship. It was all a lie. There was lies to start. Like the Democrats lied the Democrats lied to start the Korean War. The Democrats lied to start the Vietnam War. It was both times it was Truman, right? Truman denied elections in Vietnam. Yet here you are talking about Trump all the time. Trump. Right? Every accusation by a liberal is a confession. Right? And you look how obedient these lapdogs are. Right? The moment there's a war in Ukraine, it's Russia invaded. Never talk about the railway, the sabotage of Russian railway, the murder of ethnic Russians. None of that matters because it didn't happen, because it wasn't on CBS. And so, over and over again, the ADHD generation, who just can't pay attention to anything, right? Like the millennials are becoming the new boomers, right? Brainwashed, programmed, selfish narcissists. And ironically, that's exactly what they're doing. They're calling each other out on the internet, right? Calling each other selfish narcissists. Well, for once, they're both calling themselves out and admitting what they really are. Right? They're nothing but selfish narcissists. Now, Anne Rind actually gave us a way to harness, all right, the selfish desires of humans. And if you give humans adequate reward, they will adequately behave. Right? That's civilization, right? Civilization is an adequately behaved society that will adequately cooperate, right? And that anybody who gets too greedy or too selfish would be taken care of, right? The system would, right? If someone's company was rising, swallowing the others, people would oppose them and prop up the other companies, right? There would be still the market competition, right? Monopolies would collapse. But then the American government said, no, we're gonna intervene, we're gonna break up monopolies. And once they broken up foreign monopolies, what happened? They started making their own, right? And so the boomers, once they got, once the Great Depression and destroyed the great American middle class, that's it. Roosevelt was the boomer of all boomers. He kicked off the boomer generation, really. But the boomers sent the greatest generation to war to get rid of opposition. But time and time again, society will always go, shit, we've gone too far to the left, let's swing back. And that is where we're at. We are in the swing back stage now, right? We are experiencing now, we know World War One, started with the British undermining the Ottomans in the Middle East, right? All because of Lord Richard, again, a war profiteer who should have been taken out and shot. And there are admissions, and you could look it up itself. There are admissions, right? Why was the German U-boat commander let off? Because total war was waged against Japan. Why were the Japanese war criminals let off? Because none of them had done any different than the Americans had done to them at Guadalcanal. Total war, take their prisoners. The invasion of Okinawa, take their prisoners. So how can you prosecute people for alleged war crimes when you waged total war, sunk ships, never rescued the Japanese? And even today, you ask people, well, if a Russian ship sank, what would you do? When they say, oh, marshmallows, go make a sandwich or something. So you cannot say, right, that boomers have a moral compass. Right? And you ask them about Ukraine. They do not have a moral compass. Now, you look at the front, it's mostly static. Right? Today, there's a lot of action, a lot more action than yesterday. And again, I thought in the last week, it's been probing attacks, right? But it looks like Russia is gearing up for a full assault on Lyman from multiple directions. They're coming from the north. The northwest, the northeast, and I suppose you would say it's from the east, but the Lyman itself is not directly, it's not horizontal. So they're basically going to hit Lyman, cut it in half, right? And then pretty much occupy that half, right? And then try to stop reinforcements on one side while they take on the flanks, basically forcing the Ukrainians back to here. And as I've laid out many times, the Russians have a plan, right? They have contingencies. Push the Ukrainians back to here, then push the Ukrainians back to here. They're pushing up. Push them up through here and back up to here, right? That's why they've always been trying to cut these roads through here, right? But they haven't cut the major roads. They've only cut all these, right? Try to cut the small roads, right? To push them in one big line, right? Force them to march a retreat, right? Force them to march a retreat up through here, right? Try to cut off the reinforcements through here, right? They don't want them to gather here, right? They want them to gather up here. They want them to be forced out, right? Out of their line, right? If they come back to here, they could stop, right? The majority of the Russian advance, right, is, right, pretty much below this line, right? Below the Arctic line, right? A lot of people think the Arctic Circle is fixed. No. The planet rotates and tilts, right? The Arctic tilt cuts Ukraine in half. Russia doesn't want much of the Arctic half. They want to. That's why you got this icy half here, and then you got the pivot point, and Russia will come in under that. That's why the border is down here and not up here along this natural ridgeline. And from there, that's what they said, they'll cascade down, right? Now, originally the plan was Odessa, then it was revised to Mykolaiv. Then it appears that they have revised it to Kharkiv, right? So here is where you have, right, what's the fate of this? Well, it appears that is on the table as a give me, right? You give me this, right, and I give you that. But Ukraine said no, so they're taking more of Zaporozhye and says, well, actually, originally it was, you give me half of this, and I give you half of Zaporozhye. You give me the other half of Donbass, and I give you the other third of Kherson. And Ukraine said no. So they grabbed some more territory, and Ukraine still said no. So they grabbed more territory, Ukraine still said no. Right, we go back to the Hess proposal, right? Ukraine would have lost no land. The Germans would have withdrawn from France. They were already planned and already announced they were withdrawing from France, right? And cancelled Sea Lion. Right? This was a gesture to Britain. It was not stupidity. It was a gesture. So we've seen Russia make gestures and Ukraine slap the hand. So, yes, definitely, Zelensky's the Churchill of our time. The man who always wants war because he thinks he's going to win. But Churchill didn't win the war, the Americans did. Churchill just happened to be in office at the time. It's the same with Zelensky. He's not winning the war. He just happens to be in office at the time. But this time, it's not American boots on the ground and the liberal establishment is panicking. And as you can see, the Russians have inflicted a lot of damage, a lot of skirmishes. Actually, Ukraine describes them as clashes, right? Some are short-lived, some are ongoing, right? But very little territory has fallen, but it is still significant, right? That because not one offensive, right? Ukraine has not been able to launch an offensive or increase its casualty rate on Russia. In fact, Russia is grinding them still as if, and there's nothing Ukraine can do to stop them, right? They are complaining about inadequate weapons, all the usual things, right? The deep state uni party, there's Lady Gaga and her husband, Bloody Thol, right? Good old warmongers, right? None of them have fought a war, or if they did, it was back when they were standing on the hills going, "Come on, Goliath, you can get him." Now, drone attacks, drone impacts, NATO is blah, blah, blah. They claim, well, Russia is suffering crazy losses. But whose funerals are they always showing? Every day. Ukraine, right? So they tell you, Russia's safe. See, this is the thing, right? Your brain does not sort data, right? It snapshots. So it does not, right, without discipline, right, do a critical analysis. You have to learn, right, that when you're given information, it is incomplete and it will always be incomplete, and that every time you want to make an opinion, right, you want to go, how much of this, right, am I recalling, right, is this true, right? So it's best to not believe, right? The British lied about their losses in World War II. It took, 20, 40 years before they admitted to how catastrophic it was, even though it was bloody obvious it was worse than they had estimated by 50%, right? They came in, right? And then they said, how mass bombings did not affect the outcome of the war. Really, a mass bombing ended the war, right, destroyed the German ability to defend themselves. Otherwise, Germany would have annihilated the Russian troops with heavy artillery and destroyed their, 88s would have been lined across the German border if the industry had been bombed. So you tell me. All right, although Germany did get internally sabotaged. Because tell me, if German tanks were so bad, why did Britain use them from 1948 to 1956? They were World War II tanks, right? Why were they using the enemy's tanks? And then you'll make excuses. Oh, it's because the industry was so destroyed. Really? Germans didn't destroy any British industry after the fall of France. After they lost France, they had no bombers to strike Britain with. No. Now, Zelensky wants to say that Russia has to accept the ceasefire monitoring as an exchange of prisoners. Now, apparently, Kiev has more than 4,000 still. Russia has about 7,000. Remember, they've been swapping prisoners off and on now for a while, right? But it shows you that... so, if Kiev only has 4,000 Russians and Russia has about 7,000, who's suffering the greater losses, right? But Zelensky's always projecting, right? Always confessing. He's the one who won't accept a ceasefire monitor. He only wants it imposed on Russia. Whereas Russia's saying, no, it's got to be both sides. If Ukraine fires first, they got to suffer the consequences, right, of not being protected. But the European wants to bring back a mutual defence fund. They called it a mutual defence pact, but, it is. It's called Article 5. Apparently, again, Zelensky wants to absorb reward a skater for being political at the Olympics, when the Olympics is supposed to be apolitical, but he's an animal, and that's what animals do. They want to be political about everything's political, right? And you may think, I'm being political. Nope. I hate the Uni Party. I hate the liberal world order. I hate the Zoomers, the Boomers, I'm not prejudiced. I hate everybody equally. I'm not racist. I hate everyone. Now, come on, let's be serious. The idea of Ukraine to have a peace board, absolutely. Someone has to come in, run the elections, monitor the elections, and had Europe done this back in 2014, and had Europe not accepted a coup, isn't it amazing? They don't want to recognise Somaliland, right? They don't want to recognise half a dozen separatist movements around the world, but yes, we'll recognise Kosovo, the Albanian seizure of Serbian land, right? Right, even though it was the Albanian Muslims who were, I'm sorry, I answered my question, didn't I? Right? But, again, right, a peace board, someone has to run the elections in Ukraine because Ukraine can't, right? They refuse, right? You can't trust the outcome of their elections, right? Opposition parties have been banned. So, how, that's a dictator. No. And of course, Zelensky's been a typical millennial, body shaming, been stubborn, closed-minded, knocks all the chess pieces over and says, I'm always right. Every time there's a good idea, he denies it, drags it all out, then turns around and says, oh yes. And he's talking about, we stand behind the independent Poland and the free Baltic states. Independent from whom? They're not independent from Ursula, always lying. Just like you're not an independent agent, isn't that right? Klorominski's toenail. He's nothing but a mouthpiece for millionaires and billionaires from the World Economic Forum. Now, the Hungary Prime Minister, of course, Zelensky, a man in a desperate position, that he insults and then asks Hungary to... so he insults, Hungary, and then says, "Oh, please give us money and energy to continue our war." Well, Zelensky is upset because Orban said, "Go fuck yourself." They asked for more aid and they said, "No, we're actually going to stop the aid we're giving you now." This is why you should and never stop aiding, right? Or the sacrifice generation, right? The generation always asks you to sacrifice, but they keep getting more, right? More healthcare, more benefits. That's all they want. Is always more, more, more. We want privileges. Trans people, fund their lifestyle. Gay people, fund their lifestyle. Christians, can we have an Easter march? No, we're having a pride parade. The 12th this month. Woo! And it's all funded by you. Now, of course, Hungary is not the only one marching against the Ukraine war, but tens of thousands in Hungary was the largest turnout for the We Won't Die for Ukraine march. Right? This was the Budapest Peace March. There was protests in Germany and France as well. But because those are deep state controlled, look at that. And they call that tens of thousands. Yeah, that's more like hundreds of thousands. But, just like, look at them all, right? Did you imagine if Zelensky was out in a crowd like that? Hungary says no to war, no to Ukraine's war. And the Western media is crickets. Crickets, I tell you. Now, apparently, there has been progress, but it's mostly, certainly up here is in the, what you would call this, these are just grabs. As I said, towards the end of the war, there's going to be land grabs. Russia will call it their buffer zone, right? Just like in Korea, the DMZ. And eventually, these will become part of, these are just all part of the negotiation process, right? The more Zelensky loses, the more pressure on Zelensky to achieve results, and the closer he inches to his own demise. Now, I do not think that, although it is quite possible that Zelensky will actually die, it is more likely, because he's a good little UN / deep state muppet, he'll be whisked off to Israel for protection and never heard of from again, except, you'll hear from him, but it won't be him. It'll be spokesperson. It would be advisors, and more and more you'll hear about Captain Operation Sky Shield. This as America builds its air defenses and anti-missile systems, Europe's going to start rattling people's cages and go, Russian missiles. We have to be independent of America. We need our own Sky Shield. That's why they're pouring all this tech into Ukraine, so that all the boomers will go, we need Ukraine for our protection. Well, it was your buffer zone, right? So that if you saw Russian tanks coming, right, because Russia dare not fire missiles, because if they fire missiles, US goes, we got 9,000 missiles. Here, have some. It has to be a ground war. And if it's a ground war, the Americans will sit there and pluck as they try to cross Ukraine. Why is it so hard for Europeans to think? Because they always want more. Yes, I need a clip, but I don't have it. And I think we're reaching the point where we should say the cowards of Brussels, the bullies of Brussels, the bullshitters of Brussels and Berlin, the pompous Parisians and the lunatic Londarians, all of them have now been put on notice by Gen Z, right? They're not going to die for them, right? They want them to die. Fight your own wars. Isn't it amazing? All these boomers keep telling us to cut our hair and get a job. We do. The wages suck. We can't meet the cost of living. But they turn around and say, you protest, we replace you with cheap workers. Well, wait a minute. When you were protesting, you said, keep out the foreigners, they're taking our jobs. But as soon as you're in power, it's, bring in the foreigners and lower our costs. It's like, boomers have no morals. Okay, the progressives have no morals. Progressives are just the excuse makers of the system, right? They make excuses, right? If they can't get you to sacrifice your future for them by giving up your land and right, they say, it's in your economic interest, it'll make you richer, right? So they always appeal to both sides of the argument, right? Always the left and the right, never looking at the big Moloch statue behind the scenes where the arms come from, right? By the way, Moloch means sacrifice, for those who keep up with the parlance of the devil worshippers, right? Each demon, or so you have. There's talk, of course, of Baal in Iraq. The Stormbringer, the storm god, the god of war, the catastrophe of war, right? Sacrifices to Baal, which of course greatly angered not just the average Iranian, but even angered some of the people who are more moderate and thought, well, we could just reform the regime. But when some of the regime people are out there openly throwing people in the fire pits, and holding big bonfires, throwing people to pits marked Israel and America, throwing living people into fires, right, saying that we have to cleanse them, curse it, we call on Baal to curse America. And it's like, what? Oh, Baal, please destroy Israel. So, this is the deep state, right? But the deep state's our problem, but it's also their problem, right? Same with Ukraine, right? Zelensky's just a fresh face to an old problem, right? What happens when people have too much power and the people have no pushback, right? You gotta stop giving up your power. Once, right, the Great Awakening is a slow process, right? A lot of people are not awake. They're in a fugue state. They don't want to know, and they don't want to care, right? All they want is their num-nums, right? Give me my chicken tendies, mummy. I'm bird. It's been 5 minutes since I had my hair. It's been 5 minutes. There's nothing in my mouth. Go eat a bag of dicks, millennials. But that's the problem, isn't it? But it's a condition created by social media, right? This is Bill Gates. All of them have said, there's studies to show, right? If you let kids have social media before 16, if you do not self-moderate social media, you too develop a impatience that is beyond comprehension, where you can't even watch an entire TikTok video. And that's scary. But Russia is advancing a bit slow. Again, to remind you, that's deliberate. 3 settlements in the last 48 hours. I would normally say it would be 24, but this started 2 days. The offensive started 2 days ago. And, well, we don't know if this is a phony offensive or the real thing. But if tomorrow is a escalation, which I expect it will be, we should see early missile strikes, and followed by missile strikes on Wednesday, Tuesday through to Wednesday, right, with some on Thursday. But if we see a 3-day long, then the tomorrow is more fighting, right? Normally, though, it would be a slot lull with a change of the guard, right? The Russians change soldiers weekly, but not in every part, right? They rotate, right? Rotate through. Each battle group has its own methods, right? Ukraine, they also time their changes so that they can prepare for Ukraine to disrupt Ukraine's troop rotations. So next week should see like 3 to 4 towns. We should see the either Lyman or Konsk dysgramia. Okay, yeah, I try to pronounce some words and I'm either going to stutter them or choke on them. I'm sorry. It's not, I just hope you all have a good weekend. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and please support the channel. You can support me on Ko-Fi. Will someone, please? It's been a while. And Patreon. I have a few, but it'd be nice to see you there for $1. I said $1 a day last week, didn't I? It's $1 a month. Jeez. You give generously, and you too could stop an Aussie from having the warmth of collectivism. Buy my books, buy my merch. All my links in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or on the QR, or the scan the QR code on the screen. Yeah, tap the QR code. That'll do. See you in the next video. Bye for now.